Do we teach just AI literacy or do we teach creative literacy? Do we teach innovative literacy? Because maybe that's the core of what companies like Maginative will find themselves doing is we are not so much about like advancing AI literacy. We are advancing human literacy in the sense of can we be creative in this new era? Can we be thoughtful and supportive of people who are now having to change the way that they work? Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's been a wonderful week.
Excellent. I had a great week also. Been tinkering a lot, working on some of the newer AI tools, and of course, doing a lot of reading and research in terms of new papers, new models. But overall, not that many big stories this week, but some important ones. So I'm excited to dive in to talk about some of those top stories.
Yeah, let's talk about Nvidia. I think that was an interesting one. There was a little bit of a head fake or a kind of a, as we say, a mock charge back in South Africa.
So I think this follows up on last week. So last week, Nvidia released their earnings. Of course, it was a beat. However, their stock didn't really perform as expected. It kind of stayed flat, then it started to go down. And it then came out that the DOJ reportedly was investigating Nvidia for how they were working with potential competitors. They were being accused of pricing competitors out of the market, having special deals with companies that use some of their products, and so incentivizing them to use additional products and creating vendor lock-in. And it's interesting because I have very strong opinions in terms of the role that government should play with regulation and whether or not some of these mergers or acquisitions are something that they should be looking into. But what ended up happening later on in the week, we had to update the story with a correction because Nvidia came out and flat out denied that they were being investigated. They denied being served any subpoenas. And I think the DOJ also came out to say that they didn't serve any. So the reporting that was done obviously was flawed. And that's also one of the things that we have to just be very cautious with because Nvidia's stock market cap dropped by, I think, 100 and something billion dollars in one day.
240 something billion. Yeah, I mean, basically the size of the size of a small country GDP.
Crazy when you think of these numbers. But before I dive into my thoughts, Richard, what are your thoughts, kind of looking at this story and how it unfolded?
So philosophically, I'm actually pro-regulation for some of these things. I think antitrust has a specific and very interesting place here. We've seen that probably had a decade where antitrust was asleep at the wheel, but then they woke up and they got very serious. We saw the Alphabet decision recently. There's the possibility that they may even force Alphabet to break up some of those holdings. I think it's a net positive for the economy. Essentially, you're creating a multiple from one, and that gives the marketplace a lot more options. We saw that way back when Bell was broken up into multiple companies, and that created several billion-dollar companies like AT&T and others. So generally, I'm positive on that kind of regulation. However, I do also think that you're right in the sense that we've got to be careful about these stories. If there is a rumor going around that the DOJ is investigating a company and it loses like a significant portion of its value, that's not great. I think the rumor mill is something that we have to be very careful of. So the way that I have adjusted my thinking on this is I generally have a kind of a sleep on it mentality, a 24-hour rule of thumb. And that is, I hear a story or breaking news or some kind of rumor, and I give it about 24 hours before I make a decision on that. So this is not a show about investments. This is not a show about how you should spend your money. But for my own personal portfolio, I would never make a choice based on a rumor. I would always wait some time. I'd want to know whether those checks and balances kicked in and found out whether that was just something that was circulating on social media or whether it was actually a fact. So yeah, I think that's good. Just a good advice for anybody in anything. Like when you hear news and you feel your nervous system kicking in and going, oh my God, what is happening here? Sleep on it. Give it some time. Very often, just a few minutes really will help you just kind of sit back. But I find that like 24 hours before making a decision or looking into this in terms of a decision.
I completely agree because this story broke, I think, on Monday, which is a national holiday in the US. And we didn't cover it. I waited until Tuesday and I saw that it was gaining traction. And I was like, well, it's probably important that we're doing this given the drop that we're seeing in the market cap for the company. And the following day, it comes out, and I'm like, wow, if we had waited just one more day, we would have gotten that correction.
So, Chris, there is one more thing. You asked me what my opinion was. So, I'm net positive on regulation, and obviously, I have this kind of rule of thumb. The other thing to consider here is, of course, that we may actually be finding that the market is looking for reasons to punish these overperforming stocks. They are overperforming in many respects. They do not have the revenues associated with them in the general market, not just specifically Nvidia, but the AI market is, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars in revenue from these companies and, trillions of dollars in valuation. The math is not mathing. So I don't think that these are inconsequential. I think that the fact that these rumors are coming out is probably the market seeking reasons to understand why this is either up or down, and they need they need a fall guy, they need a scapegoat. So I wouldn't uh, rule out the fact that we will probably see a lot more of these kind of over adjustments or overreactions to news that's coming out, because I think everybody's a little nervous. I think everybody's seeing that there is a bubble here, and they're looking for reasons to understand why that bubble should exist.
Okay, so I can buy that, but here's where I stand with the regulation side of things. This week, outside of the Nvidia story, we also saw Microsoft's acquisition of Inflection, which is what the UK authorities are saying it's basically an acquisition. They cleared them. They said that they didn't see any issues with any competitive advantage that was gained. But you're seeing where you have regulators looking into these relationships. And of course, there are ongoing relationships, such as the Microsoft OpenAI relationship, that are being investigated both in the US and in the UK. So this atmosphere of looking into anti-competitive behavior, AI regulation is certainly not going away anytime soon. The questions I have specifically around NVIDIA would be, well, one, assuming that, okay, this is a company that for decades has been investing, they made a significant bet on a certain type of technology. They weren't thriving for such a long time. And suddenly, their technology and their bet proved to work out long term. Why should they be punished for that? Right? If they ended up building moat by creating an ecosystem, so like Apple has an ecosystem, all these different companies have ecosystems that they build to try to retain their customers. If that was the extent to which they were doing it, what is wrong with that? And so for me, not saying that you shouldn't have regulators look in, because I think it's very important that we have oversight, and so it's fine for them to look and to come out with an accurate assessment. However, I want to be clear that my position is that you shouldn't be punishing a company like an Nvidia for doing extremely well because they somehow made a bet on that technology. AMD didn't make the same bet.
I don't think that's the problem. I don't think the fact that they're doing so well is why they're being investigated. I think what we're looking at here is, why are they doing so well? Are they doing well because they made really thoughtful, interesting, useful, innovative choices, or because they have a decade-long strategy of manipulation that hasn't been noticed? So I think that's really the question: is, hey, do well. This is a free market economy. This is capitalism at its absolute finest. Yes, that's great. However, how did they get there? And so we've seen multiple times now companies employing very long-term strategies to either corner a market or have a dominance in a certain area. And that was overlooked. We saw how antitrust kind of got away from us. We didn't really investigate it. We saw how big companies like Meta and others really just became like the dominant players. So I think it's not so much about, hey, go and do well, and we should reward you for that. It's, how did you do well? How did you gain a benefit? How did you get this dominance?
So let's look at Nvidia then, right? Because they invented the GPU, started as a gaming device, gained some amount of traction, was popular with gamers mostly, tried to establish relationships with Apple that didn't really work out well. And in the end, for a decade or so, and they were relegated to just being a gaming component as opposed to an AMD or an Intel. So AMD and Intel made different bets. Cryptocurrencies came around and the GPU suddenly regained function. I don't think you could say, well, Nvidia was predicting cryptocurrency back in the 90s, right? But somehow their bet paid off. And even crypto went up, crypto went down. And then AI and the language models came around and they needed that same technology. I think it'll be hard to point a finger to say they deliberately tried to corner the market with their technology.
I agree, but I think it's probably just worth looking at. I think that's what we're asking the regulators to do, is that we're not asking them to go out and act as kind of nefarious policemen. I think what we're asking them to do is make sure that what's happening is in fact what is being reported by these companies. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So, we have had an era where antitrust has been somewhat ignored. Any enforcement of antitrust, I should say, has been ignored. And now we're in an era where they're getting a little bit more suspicious about these companies who are doing ridiculously well. Like if you a $3 trillion company, we should have a look at you. How did you get there? That's interesting. Maybe we didn't pay enough attention to you. And just like you and I, we don't really know what's actually going on in these companies. We have what's reported, we have what's public information. But a lot of these companies are also private, and so they don't have to report as much as we see until they're acquired by a public company or until they start going public. And then we're like, that's interesting. We didn't know that about you. So I don't think this is anything different from doing a reference check on an employee that you're hiring. It's just like, hey, you're in the market now. You're playing with people's retirement money. We should know what you're doing.
So it's interesting because when you think back even over the last 5 years, Nvidia tried to acquire ARM a few years ago, and that was blocked by the UK regulators. And like for me, the question is, well, was that even anti-competitive at that point in time? If they saw that bet and they wanted to do that, you see Nvidia making acquisitions, you see them making investments in other companies. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out ultimately, because we know that they're one of the companies looking to invest in OpenAI. They're looking to invest in a lot of startups. Are they wrong for wanting to encourage growth and success within the AI ecosystem, even if ultimately they end up having their fingers into so many different pieces of the pie? So it will be worth watching. I agree with you. We should certainly have regulators looking into this. The question is this the best use of our resources right now? Is it going to stifle innovation? I don't know what that will ultimately be, but I agree. If regulators are looking into it, it's ultimately a good thing. As long as at the end, the decisions that are being made, I think, are fair for the market and helpful for the economy.
Well, as we discussed last week, one of the key disruptors or obstacles to innovation isn't so much regulation, it's bureaucracy. And I think those two things are slightly different. Regulation, and this is where the public gets it wrong as well, is regulation is asking questions about what's happening. How did you do this? Is this the right thing to do? Bureaucracy is a system that prevents you from even getting there, right? So, as we saw with DIU and with some of the other stories that we discussed around military innovation, is that there was so much bureaucracy built into the DoD that it was impossible to make anything. You just couldn't get something created. And so the Chinese and the Russians were starting to build stuff that was way ahead of us. In fact, so far ahead of us that if we had actually gone to war, we would have been, facing a situation where something as large as an aircraft carrier could have been taken out by something as small as a $1,000 drone. And really that's concerning. That is a national security issue that has evolved very slowly through incremental additions of bureaucracy. So I think those two things they're distinct. There might be some overlap there, but they're certainly distinct in the sense that regulators are kind of looking from the outside in and saying, what's going on here? Bureaucracy is literally the curse that's happening within the organization. It's the virus that infects you from the inside, or the cancer. And I think that's We discussed that last week. For those of you who want to understand a little bit more about that, there's a really good book called Unit X, which we discussed last week, about the bureaucracy of the DoD and how that got in the way of an innovation and literally got in the way of AI, making it into these key decisions. AI was, somewhat ignored, considered to be a little bit of a kind of a weird outside threat that didn't really matter. And it turned out that the reason why these drones were so successful, the reason why these small weapons were able to take out such large targets was because of the AI. It had really nothing to do with the mechanical technology at all. Um, so yeah, I think that's really a key thing here, is that we have to just make a distinction between regulation and bureaucracy. And yeah, they both look like the government, and they both have a government kind of mood to them, but I think they are somewhat distinct.
All right, so I love that. Let's switch gears. Speaking of Nvidia, speaking of investments, Nvidia was one of the participants in Sakana AI's new funding round. So this is their Series A. They raised a Series B, I think, earlier this year, and this was $100 million. So some background: Sakana was founded by David Ha and Leon Jones. They were formerly at Google, and a part of the landmark paper of "Attention is all you need." Basically, the authors of this paper went on to be the founders of some of the biggest AI companies. You're talking OpenAI, you're talking Inflection, all of them just kind of dispersed. It's like the new PayPal mafia, but in the AI space. And what is interesting about Sakana is that they moved to Japan and they said, hey, you know what? We want to take a completely different approach to how we're building models. We want to build models that are inspired by nature. And so Sakana is Japanese for a school of fish, I believe. And so they're looking at multiple smaller models and how they can coordinate and work together. So some really interesting things. They released some models earlier this year. But what was just really poignant for me here is, one, you're seeing this rise in sovereign AI, where a country like a Japan is recognizing that, listen, we need to invest in AI that understands our culture, that understands our norms, that speaks and understands our language. And we can't just rely on the big open AIs of the world to do that for us. This is increasingly going to be a national resource for countries. And so you're seeing companies like Sakana who are making this bet really grow quickly. They're raising a lot of money. And of course, Nvidia is there to ensure that it's being built on their infrastructure. And so they also announced a partnership where they're going to be building out that infrastructure, not just for Sakana, but overall with telcos and so on within the country, to provide resources and access to their models as they become more capable and they take them off the ground.
Very, very exciting. Also remind people that these sovereign models are there to protect the IP, not just the cultural significance of this in the way this intelligence is designed, but also some state secrets, if you will, some IP that is deliberately created within those organizations that are state funded or state supported.
Exactly. You did have some additional funding news. I think U.com raised a funding round. But the other big round that we all were kind of looking and thinking, like, what, is from Ilya Sutskever's new company. It's called Safe Superintelligence Inc. And again, backstory: he was the co-founder, the chief scientist at OpenAI. He broke up away from the leadership with Sam Altman last November, tried to overthrow him as the CEO. It didn't work out, and a few months later, he basically left, saying that he wanted to work on something different. And so with Safe Superintelligence Inc., they're saying they want to do a straight shot to safe superintelligence. We'll talk about what that means, but the big news is that they raised $1 billion. Now, this company is 3 months old. They raised $1 billion, and they're now valued at $5 billion. Richard, hot take. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's somewhat connected to what we were talking about the market understanding Nvidia and looking at, is this real? Is this valuation real? Clearly, we're in a hot market. Clearly, there's a bubble here. Clearly, we have some real concerns about what is actually going on. Are these companies really worth what they are saying they're worth? And I think that Time will have to tell. We know that infrastructure is a good bet, right? Over time, with the internet, with crypto, those were actually pretty good bets. Like, we had a lot of value being created out of the base, the foundation of what these technologies need to live on, these rails, if you will. I think what's a little concerning is all the stuff that's built on top of that. Does that have the real valuation? We're just starting to see user numbers start getting to the millions. Actually, I think OpenAI said 100 million. Is that correct?
For their enterprise offerings, I think they have hit 1 million users per month.
So what we're seeing on the consumer side is very different from what we would expect to see on the enterprise side. So I think it's early days. I'm not a huge fan of speculation, but I do feel like we're seeing a pattern here, and that is companies that are raising a significant amount of money with very little evidence that they can actually return that investment need to be scrutinized. We need to understand what is actually going on here. What is the value that they're producing? If, as many of them are saying, they intend on receiving their upside from sales associated with enterprise or sales associated with very large teams, we have to then ask the question, how is that going to happen? I myself spend most of my day in the enterprise world. I understand how long it takes to work with somebody. If I'm working with a bank, it can take months, if not years, to get the security clearance that we need to put new technology inside of these banks. So where exactly is the money going to come from to fund these revenue opportunities that these companies are talking about? And that's really, I don't think it's not there. I think there is a there. I think there is money there. I think it's timing that I'm most concerned about. Is it just takes so long for these enterprises to procure new technology, and then they have to implement it. Chris, that's the thing. Once you've got through those checks and balances that are necessary for these enterprises, I don't want my bank just adopting new technology on a whim. I want them to go through that bureaucracy and make sure that my money is safe. However, that's only the first part of the problem. Then you've got to actually make that technology useful. And so that's a people problem. Now you've got human beings saying, why should I adopt technology that's going to replace my job? Why should I learn something new? I've just established all these new skills, and now you're asking me to establish even more skills. So I think we have an adoption or a usage concern there. And then ultimately, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be adopted and secured. As somebody who is working in an environment where I'm selling software to enterprises, just because they adopted and used it for a year doesn't mean they're going to actually continue to use it for that period. So when it comes to renewals, what does that ARR look like? Is it just for 1 year? Are you making 2 or 3 or 10-year deals? Like, what do these deals actually look like? What are the terms of them? So there's so many questions that are unanswered right now. And I would love to say that $1 billion investment in safe AI sounds like a really good idea. I think philosophically it's a great idea. Would I bet on that as an investor? I would ask questions.
Richard, you hit the nail on the head. Okay, I love that you teed it up like that because I'm going to swing for the fences. Safe Superintelligence Incorporated, right? First of all, for me, that's a paradox. And that's just personal. I think if you're talking about superintelligence, any indication that it can be safe.
Wait, do you mean a paradox or an oxymoron?
For me, it's a paradox, and I'll tell you why. When it comes to superintelligence, I'm assuming we're saying something that is superior to human intelligence. And for us to think we're going to be able to somehow control it, keep it within the guardrails that we have defined, I think then it's not a super intelligence. It can't be both, right? And so it's either super intelligence that is somehow aligned with us on its own volition, not because of us being smarter than it. And so safe super intelligence, I'm not a believer. I want to encourage development of safe AI. I don't know if that will be to the extent of super intelligence, maybe AGI. But for me, what you said about it being philosophically ambitious, but not certainly as an investor, I'll get back to that because I think that is what bothers me so much about this investment. Let's lay some context. Let's lay the groundwork. Right now, OpenAI is valued north of reportedly $100 billion, right? With the funding that they're looking to raise. Second in line is XAI, Elon Musk's startup. It's a year old now. It's now valued at roughly $24 billion. Third, we have Anthropic, roughly $15 to $20 billion. Then you have Mistral, and of course, companies in between. I'm looking at just really the frontier models. You have Mistral at around $6 billion, and then Cohere is roughly 5.5. Now, all of these companies, they have products, they have teams, they have customers that you can look at and say, hey, there is something there that has value. You now have a startup with roughly 10 people. Yes, great pedigree, but from the get-go, you're being valued at $5 billion and you're raising $1 billion. So where does that valuation come from? Is it the people? Are you saying these people working together is worth somehow $5 billion in terms of?
Right. Are they exponentially better than any other 10 people working together? And what I've heard from two companies, so no, actually, no, that's not true. I heard from two executives, so founding executives of companies that had significant exits in the last year. Like, so when I say significant, these are billion-dollar companies. I spoke to two of those co-founding or founding members about this exact thing, and they were scratching their heads. They're like, listen, we've created billion-dollar companies. We know how hard that is. Both those companies were in frontier tech, one in robotics and one in the frontier science that actually makes the components for things like, like robotics, like weapons, like healthcare products. They were like, this stuff is really, really hard, really hard. So how is it that 10 people get to call themselves a $5 billion company 3 months in when it took us 10 or 20 years to get there? So I don't think it's sour grapes. I don't think they're looking at it and saying like, well, we didn't do it, so therefore they shouldn't do it. I think they're just asking the right questions. How are they there? How are they there so quickly?
Exactly. And I think that is what I find lacking in a lot of what we're seeing in the space. We're not asking these questions enough and demanding the answers. The other thing that I'm challenged with Safe Superintelligence Incorporated is you go to their website, it's one page with just basically their mission. There's nothing there. But I like that because they're super focused. But according to them, they don't want to be distracted by product development like you had at OpenAI. They want to be invested in.
We've heard this story before. We know how it ends.
We know, right? Like a long-term mission, and they don't want to be worried about having to generate revenue right now. Straight shot to safe superintelligence. I think there is a place for this. I think the government should be investing in this. I think DARPA and so on, because this will be something that will benefit everyone within the country. For a private investor to put their money behind a company that is saying that they're not really that interested in like creating products and figuring out how to generate revenue in the short term, I get that you can make long-term bets, but this feels really, really off. It feels really, really off to me.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is something that's, again, a pattern. We see this time and time again. And that is, it's really a case of investment interest, right? This is very little to do with like, does the solution have traction in the market yet? It doesn't. We don't even know what it is. We don't even understand what superintelligence is. We have no reason to even understand that it could be created the way that they want. Like you said, how do you create something that's way more intelligent than you and then still have control over it? But we do have a massive pent up demand from investors who needed to employ the money that LPs have given them. And they kind of came up short on crypto. And a lot of my VC buddies who put tons of time into crypto, they're struggling. I wouldn't say they're completely down and out, but they've had to, yep, yep. And those LPs are saying, well, what are you going to do with my money? So what they've said is, we're going to reinvest your money, here in this thing called AI. And there, as we know, there was a significant amount of VC money, PE money, family trust money, or family office money that was sitting around. There was as Warren Buffett has said, there's a significant amount of hoarding that's been happening because there hasn't been a lot of good stuff to invest in. If you are a big investor and you say, "Hey, great, let's go and put a ton of money into Apple or a ton of money into Nvidia," you can actually mess up that stock price because a single investor like a you know a Bill Altman or somebody like that putting a significant amount of money from a large fund into a single stock can actually change the outcome of that stock, and they can actually screw up that opportunity. And so what we're seeing is all of this LP money that was sitting in that hoarded way now being released into the market, because this is the next thing, and everybody wants to get on there. There's a ton of hype around it. Some of it's justifiable, but not all of it. And of course, we've released those funds back into the market. That's great for the economy, right? We've started to see taking the hoarded money and putting it back into the market. I would say that the unfortunate thing is I'm not sure that's always going to be the right decision. And as we've seen, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get your money back. I like, there is probably one or two good examples of companies that said, look, we're just going to spend money for 10 years. Amazon's a really good example of it. We're not going to look at profits. We're just going to invest in infrastructure. We're going to make sure that we are the biggest and best so that we can then do something else. I think it can work. But you do need to have a CEO and a board that's willing to do that. I think Jeff Bezos and the board at Amazon and their willingness to take that long term view, because it just kept getting pushed out. It was like, nope, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. I think that requires a significant amount of leadership maturity. And that's a question that we would have for Superintelligence Incorporated. Like, do they have the leadership maturity? Do they have the board maturity? Do they have the investment maturity to actually see this thing through? So very curious as to how this works out. Again, we're not going to speculate as to whether it's working or not, or whether it should work or not, but it's a super, super interesting case study here.
Well, Richard, I am going to make a call right now. Right now, on this recording, I'm making a call. So here's what I will say. Cohere recently raised their funding round and immediately announced that they were laying off employees. We have seen Mistral really try to partner with larger companies. Anthropic initially said, hey, you know what, we're all about safe AI, less focused on product. But who is innovating and leading in product like development today? Anthropic. Everybody wants to use Anthropic's products. And Anthropic themselves, they brought in leadership to focus on product development, right? Because here's the truth about AI. AI is super expensive to develop. These models are not cheap. And you saw XAI with Elon Musk. He had to invest a lot personally, but to go out and raise a lot of money in order to even compete. He's announcing his GPU clusters, and all of that is costing significant amounts of money. OpenAI is reportedly considering raising their subscription costs because, again, they need more money to build the next generation of models. And this is probably one of the most well-funded AI startups right now in this space. And so the reality is, if you're going into AI for the long game, if you're talking super intelligence, you're talking a lot of money that you're going to be looking to raise. And so I agree with you that you do have the Amazons of the world that are willing to sit and invest for 10 years and hopefully it pays off. But I think investors aren't appreciating the significant sums that these companies will ultimately need to raise long term if they want to deliver value. And the fact that it will likely be better for them to add products along the way that can somehow bring the community and the market along for the ride, but also to raise money. We saw this week where Anthropic released their enterprise plan for the first time.
Yes, very exciting.
I'm so excited about this, and we'll talk about it in depth. But the founder, one of the founders of Anthropic, came out and said they probably waited a little bit too long to focus on an enterprise offering, right? OpenAI, of course, released their enterprise offering last year, and their numbers are pretty decent. In April, I think they had 600,000 users, and now they have more than 1 million. And so you're seeing a significant increase in a short period of time. And so Anthropic is looking and they're thinking, hey, we should be just using our product because we have a similar product, maybe a superior product. Why aren't we making money along the way? And so you had people that left OpenAI that were saying, hey, OpenAI is too focused on product and making money in the short term. We need to be focused on safety. We're going over to Anthropic. And now you're seeing Anthropic almost leading the charge to say, hey, we need to focus on product so we can make money in order to invest in safety. And so this idea that, hey, we're going to create this company, focus on safe super intelligence, we're going to bypass all these other levels of intelligence without focusing on product initially. I don't see that working out. I think they're going to pivot eventually to release products that they can service to the community, and they'll be able to thrive doing that. But I do think there is a maturity in their leadership that needs to come to the realization that, hey, as much as we have these ambitions and this focus to deliver safe AI, aligned AI, AI that won't cause harm, there is the reality that it's going to cost money and investors are going to need to show returns. And you likely need to make concessions of creating a chatbot that people can go on and type to and get responses along the way.
And you know, the funny thing is, like, it doesn't really matter what your technology is. Businesses are run by people. They're employing people. These engineers are people. Their investors are people. Their board is people. It might be building super intelligence, but they're run by people. These are human beings with emotions and immaturities and incentives. So we always have to go back to that. I think any business that is looking at these core technologies needs to look at what the actual core of that technology is. And that core of technology is biology, it's psychology, it's human beings. We are the ones making the decisions. We are the ones deciding where the money goes. And yes, you're absolutely right. If you are a business like Amazon and you've already got mature leadership and you've got a great set of leaders there, you can say, yeah, let's make choices about how we're going to get there. We may not need to wait as long as everybody else, or we may decide to wait, depending on how they see it. But that requires human beings. Human beings are critical to this AI thing. So, and I've actually got something else to say on that, and I think not related to this specific story, but a couple of conversations that I've had recently with the people that are inside these organizations is that they are concerned about AI because they're worried it's going to take their jobs. Now, we've heard the story before. This is not news to anybody. But I started asking the question, why? Why are you worried about this AI taking away your job? Are you not excited by the fact that the parts of your job will be given to this partnership, this AI partnership, the mundane spreadsheet wrangling, the inbox management, the grooming of your backlog, any of the things that take so much time and effort. Now you have a partner that you can help reduce the amount of time you're spending on those things so that you can spend time being creative and problem solving. And what I've heard is, maybe not in these words, these are my words, so I'm being very cautious, that there is nothing to hide behind, right? So if you're getting paid a lot of money, David Graeber wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs. I highly recommend this book. This is probably one of the most important books to read. A lot of jobs are there because you are essentially this anonymous, somewhat hidden, invisible function within the organization that just gets something done. You go to a lot of meetings, you fill out spreadsheets, you manage OKRs. These are the kind of, dare I say it, middle managers, frozen middle as they're called. These are the people who can't explain their jobs to their parents. Hey, honey, what do you do? Well, I do this. I'm a data analyst. Or what does that actually mean? These people are probably going to think twice about adopting AI because it means that there's no busy work. There will be fewer meetings. There will be fewer inbox management or backlog grooming activities or tasks to do. And then they will have nowhere to hide. So does that justify their jobs? But B, it means that they personally have to start doing things that they are maybe not feeling confident about. And this is the really interesting part. The thing about losing your job because AI took it, that's a topic we've discussed a million times. We don't need to go down there. What's really important is, what do you do with that time? What do you do with the fact that now you are capable of spending most of your time being creative, most of your time solving problems? Do you know how to do that? Did you come up in a generation where we took all your agency away? Did you come up in a generation where school said, just be really good at doing this one thing? You could be good at engineering, you could be good at design. Don't worry about the problem solving. Let's just talk about tool usage and process flow and workflow. And you just tell your boss tells you what to do and you do that. Now you might find yourself in a situation where you are given the opportunity to be creative, to be what I would call an artist. Hey, can you now create in a way that is pure? Can you write poetry, music? Can you create art? Can you create a solution or solve a problem that is genuinely innovative and interesting? Do we have the skills to do that? I think that there might be a generation of people who are genuinely frightened because they have not had the opportunity to do that yet. And here's the really scary thing is they may not want to do it. They may not feel ready to do that. So does the pendulum then swing back to an era where we can have somewhat of a renaissance of an enlightenment? Where we say, yeah, there are efficiencies here, but how do we train and nurture our young people and even the people like me who are going to have to reinvent themselves? Hey, I'm in my 50s. What does this mean to me? Do I have to reinvent myself? Do I have to take 50 years of experience and check it at the door and say, nope, I'm going to have to do some other stuff? So lots of questions, lots of interesting opportunities for you and I as literacy people to think about, do we teach just AI literacy or do we teach creative literacy? Do we teach innovative literacy? Because maybe that's the core of what companies like Maginative will find themselves doing is we are not so much about like advancing AI literacy. We are advancing human literacy in the sense of, can we be creative in this new era? Can we be thoughtful and supportive of people who are now having to change the way that they work?
Oh, Richard, I love that so much. We are going to have a sidebar just on that. I love that. It's funny. One of the internal monologues that I've been having over the last week stemmed from a question I think I saw online, just around models generally, language models. And the question I asked myself is, what is a language model without its system prompt? That initial system prompt that tells the model, this is what you should think, this is how you should behave, this is who you are. It's almost like programming in natural language, right? You're telling it the perspective and the fabric of reality that it should basically rely on. As we think through AI and where it is different from a human, an AI needs to be told what problem it needs to go and solve. It needs to be given that initial ambition to say, this is what you should do. And when I listen to you talk about problem solving, creative thinking, for a lot of workers, you're right. When the busy work fades, you still need to be able to say, hey, this is the problem I want to solve, and to direct an AI to go and do it. And if you don't know how to think through those problems, or to think of what problems to tackle. I think that's where things will get really interesting for people that have been hiding behind the process work and the backlog grooming, as you said, versus actually contributing to the bottom line. And it's how the system builds fat, right? Like when you've grown enough where you need to have a project management system, then you need to hire somebody who is going to manage the project management system. And so all of a sudden you have all of like these layers of just infrastructure within the organization for your operations that are being run by people. And it's important work to do because of how the systems are set up. But with AI coming in the mix, that's going to change. And so what is your role? How are you thinking that will evolve?
Yeah.
Super exciting conversation to have.
Again, this podcast is not about just pointing fingers at things and saying this is what's wrong. We also, you and I spend a significant amount of our time helping our leaders and executives and even ICs work through these problems and understand them. I would like to suggest that a key part of understanding how you operate as a human being in a world that is very, very clearly dominated by technology. It's not just AI. I mean, we could have had this conversation, 20 times in the last 20 years about all the new tech that's emerging, including hardware. The fact that you and I even having this conversation on a live stream video from two different cities is just part of that story. One of the things that I've always benefited from is this principle that the technology itself is somewhat, I'm agnostic about that. I don't really care about the technology itself. I'm curious about how it works. I'm curious about what it does, but I'm not interested in the specifics of the technology because I'm old enough to have seen a lot of technologies come and go. There was a time when if you didn't you were told that if you didn't know C++, you would be obsolete. If you didn't know HTML, you would be obsolete. If you didn't understand crypto, you would be obsolete. If you didn't understand how to design on mobile, you'd be obsolete. This is the same conversation. These technologies come and go, and they come and go really quickly. In my lifetime alone, I've seen massive changes, waves and waves of this stuff. And so the advice that I would have for somebody is think of these things as your partners. Bring them in as your assistants. There's a really good reason why they're called agents and assistants, right? There's not a mistake there. Bring them in as your partners. Understand how they can amplify what it is that you want to do with your time and with your energy. How can they help you get there faster? But even when you do that, do not get emotionally connected to these things. You don't have to be, insert the technology name expert. You can be very curious about it and you can adopt it for a while and then you can say, okay, what's the next thing? And we've seen this because I've also been in a situation where I've been selling tools to designers and to engineers and they get absolutely, dogmatic about something. They're like, we're so invested in this technology, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And 6 months later, they're onto something else. We saw it most obviously with InVision. Like everybody was an absolute InVision zealot. This was religion for a lot of people. And then Figma came along, and those same zealots who were, picketing at the gate of InVisions were suddenly picketing at the gate of Figma. So I think being agnostic about technology is really important. Focus on your timeless skills. Focus on your ability to understand. Be a bit of a generalist. Go and find out what's happening out in the world. Be curious about more than just the technology. Understand, as we have discussed in this particular podcast, that ultimately these things are run by people. Who are these people? How do they get to where they are? How are they maturing? What does a mature organization look like? What does a mature person look like? How can you recognize that? Jim Collins has written extensively on this. This is called Level 5 Leadership. Google that. Ask ChatGPT or Anthropic to go and give you a summary of what Level 5 leadership is. Understand anti-fragility. Understand how people work in a complex system. Complexity is not going away. Today is the least complex day of your life. Every other day beyond this will be hotter and more complex. There is no getting around that. You have a choice, though. You have a choice to be able to say, you know what? I'm not going to connect myself to this temporary or transitory thing. I'm going to connect myself to the things that are timeless. How do people operate? What is inside that DNA that's making people behave in a certain way? Get smart on that. Get smart on the biology. Get smart on the psychology. Get smart on the organizational structures and systems that are operated by people. That will serve you very, very well today and tomorrow and the day after that.
Oh, Richard, I love everything you just said. The one thing I'll add to anyone listening, we are going to be having some amazing leadership in-person events coming up next year that you absolutely want to be a part of. What you just heard is just a glimpse of the conversations that we're going to be facilitating. I do think it's important that leaders have this space and the time and connections to talk to each other, to talk with advisors around how to navigate the space that we're in right now. So super excited about those events. Subscribe to Maginative to find out when they're going to be launching. Of course, we'll be talking about them on the various social platforms as we get closer, but 100% agreed with everything that you're saying. All right. So wrapping up, there's one story that I want to just go back to before we close out for the day, and that's with Anthropic's new Claude Enterprise. If you're a business and you're looking to bring on an AI assistant, you're a larger organization, you could look at ChatGPT Enterprise, but now you have Anthropic's Claude Enterprise. And here's why I'm excited about this. They are giving you a 500,000 context window to work with for your AI queries. I'll put that in perspective for you, because 500,000 tokens doesn't really mean much to the average user. But here's what you can do with it from a business standpoint. You can upload up to 100 30-minute sales transcripts. You could upload up to 100,000 lines of code. You could upload up to 15 full financial reports. That's a lot of data that you're able to keep inside of one prompt in order to work with a model. Now, when you combine that with Claude projects, where you can now create a space, add in the context of your domain. So maybe you're submitting RFPs and you put in your last year of RFP submissions for the model to learn and understand what your value proposition is, how you position your people and the services that you're offering. And then it is able to help you to create better RFPs, or at least a skeleton for RFPs that you're sending out. That's a tangible execution that you can now do with a model like Anthropic's Claude Enterprise plan, right? They also have now native integrations coming for tools that can bring in additional data. So for example, you can now connect to your GitHub and you can select the repository, and the model can now just go get all your code. And so when you're asking it to assist with code, it will have the context of your entire app code base. And because it can handle up to 100,000 lines, that's a lot of code. And of course, these context windows are only getting larger. And then finally, they have a bunch of additional security features baked in. Super, super excited about this. My only criticism is that it's only limited to enterprise plans. I wish that this would be something that we could use without a requirement for a certain number of users. It is something that I have reached out to Anthropic to be like, hey, small businesses need access to this technology also, right? What are your thoughts, Richard?
I think Anthropic makes really good choices. You know, one of the lessons that we learned about the way that the Amazon universe operates is that they very often look at their balance sheet and ask the question, are there things here that we're paying for that we can get somebody else to pay for? The really good examples of that are AWS and delivery. Delivery was essentially something that they turned into Amazon Prime. So you pay for your delivery even before you paid for anything to arrive. These are constantly the questions that Anthropic's asking is, could we get somebody to pay for something that we can then provide to a larger audience? Enterprise is the obvious place to start. There are going to be significant amounts of enterprises that can say, look, we don't need an AI native solution yet, but we do need something that's going to help us make good choices about our business. I think about one of the companies that I'm working with. We have that opportunity where we don't need a native AI solution right now, but we could use this integration to GitHub to find out whether we can actually build microservices or solutions to some of the things that we're doing before we even integrate that. So they're very, very useful. I think that the reason why I mentioned that is because then enterprise starts to pay for the next tier down. Right? Once you've got those big customers paying you millions of dollars a year, then you can say, hey, SMB, we've got a solution for you. And then eventually you can say, hey, this is what's available to the consumer.
Wait, Richard, the wait.
I know. But, I think the one way that I've found that helps me get into this is like being an advisor to companies where they're starting to use these tools. I get a first look at them. I get to understand what their resistance might be or their attractiveness to these products might be. So yeah, I think it's early days. We're just kicking tires on this one.
Yes, we of course already started recommending this for companies. And so if you're looking for a really great AI assistant to roll out within your organization, Anthropic Know is going to be a viable solution to explore. But with that, there are so many other stories, Replit agents, additional funding news that are on the website. As always, head on over to Maginative.com. You'll be able to keep up to date with the most important stories in AI on a weekly basis. You'll get a digest of those stories, so you can just check your email and quickly look at the top stories, and whatever you're interested in, you can read those stories. We have a tagging system, so if you're interested in a specific vertical, a specific company, or a specific topic or theme, the website is super organized in a way for you to find all of that information very quickly. We're developing new content on a regular basis. And so if you have ideas, if you have content that you're interested in seeing more of our conversations, you'd want us to have more of guests that you'd want us to have on our podcast, reach out to us. We love hearing from you. But overall, thank you for the support. Thank you for engaging with us. If you enjoyed this conversation, give this video a thumbs up or a like on whatever platform you're on. But with that, Richard, any final thoughts before we sign off today?
I think the one thing that I would say is get outside. It's still summer here in the States, even though it might feel like fall. Get outside, enjoy the weather. Remember that technology isn't everything. Yeah, there's a big, wide world out there.
I love that. So with that, guys, have a great time. Until next week, one love.
One love.